I know the Republicans said that the smoking gun were these financial records that you were able to subpoena and got your hands on. They show that some of the president's relatives were paid more than $10 million from foreign sources between 2015 and 2017. And your party, the Republican investigators, say that that's proof of influence peddling by Hunter and James. But that's just your suggestion. You don't actually have any facts to that point. You've got some circumstantial evidence. And the other thing is, of all those names, the one person who didn't profit is there's no evidence that Joe Biden did anything illegally.
Well, if you look at the laptop and the emails between the president's son and his associates, they went to great lengths to hide Joe's involvement. They even gave him nicknames. They called him the Celtic and the big guy. But make no mistake, Joe Biden was involved. All these countries that the Bidens were receiving money from were countries that Joe Biden was actively visiting in. Many of these countries were receiving foreign aid that Joe Biden volunteered with the Obama administration to be in charge of. We look now at the Biden presidency. Many of the decisions he's made with respect to China that I would argue put China first and America last would leave most Americans scratching their head. Why would any president do this? So we know that the complexity of the way the Bidens set these shell companies up were made to try to disguise not only the money they were receiving, but also Joe's involvement. So we're at the very beginning stages of this, but in talking with the informants that we have, some of the former Biden associates that nobody's heard from yet, we know that Joe Biden was actively involved, and we're still looking for more bank records that we believe will implicate Joe Biden's active participation in this at the end of the day.
All this work by Republicans to desperately try and prove this notion that Joe Biden is some corrupt mob boss, and even Fox News isn't buying it. I'm not saying that Republicans have completely wasted the entirety of their House majority, but yeah, I know that's exactly what I'm saying. Now, despite months and months of Republicans trying their level best to implicate Joe Biden in some giant racketeering scheme, they failed to produce even a modicum of evidence proving their claims. In fact, their preliminary findings uncovered zero evidence of any link to Joe Biden. Here's what the Republican investigation did uncover: that businesses connected to Hunter Biden received more than $10 million from foreign companies, and that Joe Biden falsely denied that his son had ties to Chinese businesses. But here's the thing: it is not illegal or even abnormal for a private citizen to do business. Hunter Biden is a lawyer. He was paid for legal and consulting services. If you don't agree that he was qualified, that's your prerogative. But again, it is not illegal. The issue would have been if those payments to Hunter had a link to Joe Biden, but they didn't. So at this point, Republicans are basically harassing a private citizen for doing business because they're desperate to implicate his dad, for which they've failed to produce a single link. In fact, that's a point that Democratic Congressman Daniel Goldman brought up in our upcoming interview.
It's shocking to see the rhetoric that's coming out of the Republicans based on what they have produced, talking about public corruption at the highest order and all this Biden crime family stuff. First of all, let's be clear. What they have is some corporate entities, which presumably had business deals with foreign entities, received money, and then distributed that money to other individuals, very possibly and likely investors in that corporate entity. I mean, this happens thousands and thousands of times every day. But what they don't have is any link to the president, and yet they're acting as if the president is some kind of mob boss overseeing a racketeering enterprise, trying to do business, or I mean, even worse, to use, to essentially get paid by foreign governments in return for policy decisions. They haven't found an iota of that. There is nothing wrong with the private citizen doing business in China. And in fact, we know that. We know that the Republicans believe that because Donald Trump had a Chinese bank account until 2018 while he was president.
Yeah.
So let's get off our high horse. Let's stop exaggerating what we found in order to support your baseless accusations. And let's get back to doing the business that we're supposed to be here to do.
And that full interview will be available only on my YouTube channel this weekend, so make sure to subscribe to watch the rest. As for James Comer, there's another statement that he made that I think pretty effectively sums up his failed effort here.
We know that Joe Biden was actively involved, and we're still looking for more bank records that we believe will implicate Joe Biden's active participation in this at the end of the day.
We know that Joe Biden was actively involved, and we're still looking for more bank records that we believe will implicate Biden's active participation in this at the end of the day, which is a lot of words to say that they have nothing. They just believe that he'll be implicated, which of course can be chalked up to nothing more than wish casting. There is a big difference between we have evidence that implicates Joe Biden and we believe that we may implicate Joe Biden at the end of the day, but that difference doesn't fall in Republicans' favor. And what's so pathetic about all of this is that this is the basket in which Republicans put all of their eggs. They've spent months toiling away at this because they were so hell-bent on vilifying Joe Biden. They didn't lift a single finger to lower prices or tackle inflation, which is what they promised to do when they were campaigning. And yet instead, they've launched these kangaroo probes that have amounted to nothing. They've wasted taxpayer dollars, and at the end of the day, they've got so little to show for themselves that even Fox hosts are pushing back on this. I mean, talk about a party that has proven itself utterly useless with the power that's been given to them. And yet still, despite the obviousness with which this whole scheme has failed, still there are Republicans who are pushing this narrative. Like, for example, in the least surprising twist of fate ever, here's Ron Johnson.
Events, where is the quid pro quo? What are whistleblowers and more bank documents now showing alleging bribery there and more? What do you say? What do you see?
Well, again, that is a difficult thing to prove.
And it's not just Ron Johnson. Here's Ted Cruz, who's now even talking about impeaching Joe Biden for allegations that they have demonstrably no clue the substance of.
They're saying that they believe the DOJ and the FBI possess an unclassified FD 1023 that describes an alleged criminal scheme involving then Vice President Biden and a foreign national relating to the exchange of money for a policy decision. That would be a high crime and misdemeanor, wouldn't it, Senator?
It absolutely would. In fact, it doesn't have to be a high crime or misdemeanor because the Constitution specifies that impeachment lies for treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors. Bribery is explicitly noted in the Constitution. And I got to say, the evidence, not only against Hunter Biden, but the evidence against Joe Biden being complicit and profiting from this corruption is growing and growing and growing. Every week on my podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz, I've walked listeners through the detailed evidence that's growing.
So, okay, just want to make sure we're clear here. Trump illegally bribing a porn star with hush money to hide damaging information from American voters just a couple of weeks before an election in a blatant violation of campaign finance laws, that's A-OK. Trump's own daughter Ivanka using her senior White House role to get dozens of trademarks for her businesses approved in China in an obvious bribery scheme, no problem. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, using his senior White House role to cultivate corrupt connections with the Saudi crown prince who gave him $2 billion, no comment from Republicans. But Biden's son, who, by the way, doesn't work in the White House, conducting business with zero link to Joe Biden himself, a point that even James Comer concedes, yeah, that's impeachment worthy for Republicans. Got it. And yet here's the thing about all of this. This is very clearly just Republicans searching for any excuse to impeach Joe Biden. It is a conclusion in search of evidence. They are grasping at straws in the most pathetic and obvious way possible and embarrassing themselves on national television on a weekly basis while doing it. And yet, while Republicans are busy using their majority to conjure up non-existent impeachment predicates, contrast that with what Democrats did in the majority in the previous 2 years. They passed once-in-a-generation infrastructure investments, lowered prescription drug costs, passed the biggest climate investment in history, oversaw record job growth, brought the unemployment rate down to record lows, allowed Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices, passed historic manufacturing investments that are already leading to multi-billion-dollar projects across the country, signed the PACT Act for veterans' health care, and enshrined marriage equality protections into federal law. And yet, what do Republicans do when they have power? They try to undermine all of those Democratic accomplishments while also wasting everyone's time with this nonsense. This is what you get when you put fundamentally unserious people in charge. And if you're looking for anyone to make the case that Republicans don't deserve power, they're making that argument most effectively themselves. Before you go, I need your help. I'm right on the cusp of hitting 2 million subscribers, so please help me grow this channel so the progressive media ecosystem grows by hitting the subscribe button right here on the screen. I also started a Spanish channel so we can finally start regaining some of that lost ground among Spanish speakers, so if you want to help support those efforts, you can hit that subscribe button. And finally, if you listen to podcasts and you want to support mine, you'll find a link to that on the screen as well. Thanks so much for watching.